Congressman Andy Barr. He is a member of the Financial Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. And Congressman, we are grateful to have you here this morning. First, what do you make of the president blaming Trump?
Well, what we need to be doing right now, what we need to be focused on is not assigning premature blame, but instead focusing on vigorous oversight of the financial regulators to make sure we prevent systemic risk and restore financial stability. We also need to make sure that the uninsured depositors are made whole without a taxpayer bailout. But let me just say, this was not a failure of regulation, as the president suggests. It was a failure in the proximate cause, of course, was the failure of bank management, but also a failure of bank supervision and a failure of government policy as the underlying cause. Overspending by the Democrats, which fueled inflation, and then a monetary policy that kept interest rates too low for too long, quantitative easing when we had economic growth, resulted in a need for a precipitous rise in interest rates. And that, combined with basic bad bank management here, a huge percentage of uninsured deposits, combined with a failure to hedge interest rate risk, resulted in this bank failure. But look, the fact that the regulators over the weekend had the existing legal and regulatory tools to do what they did to restore some semblance of market confidence demonstrates that the existing regulations are all we need. And if the bank supervisions had done their job and looked at this unhedged interest rate risk, the San Francisco Fed in particular, the regulators would not have needed to do what they did over the weekend. But calls for more regulation on regional banks and putting more pressure on regional banks with more rules and regulations is not the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that this president can actually look at us with a straight face and try to blame other people in the face of everything you just said. Where is the accountability? I mean, what consequences for 15 years of zero interest rates? Where's the accountability on the Federal Reserve and on the Treasury? The fact that the rules in place and the policies in place were making the sector even more vulnerable than people understood. You know, I mean, here we have 40-year high inflation. We had Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Jay Powell from the Fed telling us inflation was transitory. Meanwhile, we're watching inflation cut into our wages. We have bank failures now, the second and third largest bank failure ever. All partly a result of these wildly easy policies from the Federal Reserve, zero interest rates for 15 years. What's going to happen there? What are you going to do about it, sitting on the Financial Services Committee?
Well, as I said, in the near term, the important thing is to be an adult and not assign political blame right now, but oversight over the federal regulators to make sure we eliminate any systemic risk, to restore financial stability, to the extent possible, protect the uninsured depositors and all the payroll that's out there without a taxpayer bailout. But ultimately, in the longer term, we are going to have oversight hearings about the underlying causes of this. And Maria, you're absolutely right. The underlying causes was basic fiscal and monetary policy errors and a failure not of a lack of regulation, but of inadequate bank supervision. And the regulators need to do some soul searching here about extracurricular political errands that they're on instead of basic nuts and bolts bank supervision. The bank regulators have all the tools that they had. They have all the authorities that they need. And over the weekend, they used them, and it shows that they have the tools. But they need to be basically cognizant of the interest rate risk that, frankly, fiscal policy and monetary policy caused, and that's why we have interest rate sensitivity in many of these regional banks. Well, so a lack of hedging is important, and also, just to finish the thought, you know, this particular bank, SVB, you know, had 90% uninsured deposits concentrated in a single sector, 50% of the market share in tech, a sector under distress, and that's why you had a run on these uninsured deposits, and the fact that the bank management did the riskiest thing that they could have done, which is invest those deposits in long-dated hold-to-maturity securities.
Yeah, I mean, you had tech and also biotech as well. Those sectors now are scrambling. And I want to know, are we also using these tools to bail out China? Because this is also a China story. Morgan Ortagus tweeted this: surprise, surprise, SVB was in deep with Chinese banks and companies. Can we all agree U.S. taxpayers should not bail out the Chinese companies who invested in Silicon Valley Bank? And then you've got the Financial Times this morning reporting that SVB's China venture is now in doubt. A former State Department spokesperson, Morgan Ortagus, tweeted this. We just showed you Silicon Valley Bank's China venture in doubt. Morgan Ortagus tweeted what I just said to you. But now we want to look at whether or not this is a bailout. And the Financial Times this morning is reporting that Ken Griffin, who, of course, founded Citadel, U.S. capitalism is breaking down before our eyes, says Ken Griffin. He is saying that the rescue package for Silicon Valley Bank unveiled by regulators is breaking down capitalism before our eyes. He told the Financial Times that the government should not have intervened to protect all SVB depositors following the collapse of the bank. The U.S. is supposed to be a capitalist economy, and that's breaking down, he said in an interview yesterday. He says there's been a ton of financial discipline with the government bailing out depositors in full. So what are we supposed to do now, Congressman? Support and guarantee all deposits at all banks?
Well, Griffin is right that capitalism requires risk. And in order to have market discipline and avoid a moral hazard, you have to allow failure. In this case, there is a failure, even with the government's intervention, insofar as the equity holders and the bond holders and obviously the management are being punished here. But the point is taken that there is a, quote, and Tom Hainig also said there's a bailout of the uninsured depositors. These depositors were induced to park millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars of uninsured deposits at this one institution. We need to look at why that happened, why there was that inducement to take on that much risk on the part of the depositors. But it is noteworthy to say that with the exception, the systemic risk exception that the FDIC and Treasury and the Fed invoked here, that the taxpayers, at least for now, the taxpayers are not bailing out SVB depositors or these other uninsured depositors. It's an assessment on the banks through the Deposit Insurance Fund. But the point is a good one, that whatever we do here, we should not put the liability on the taxpayer. That's critically important, and we need market discipline.
Now, you think you'll have hearings on this?
Absolutely. I anticipate hearings soon. And again, we're going to be exercising oversight of the regulators to make sure we, number one, prevent systemic risk, restore financial stability. But we'll also look at these other issues relating to the underlying causes, bad monetary fiscal policy, and preventing taxpayer bailouts, which really would create a moral hazard that we must avoid.
Yeah. All right. We will be watching. Congressman, thank you. Andy Barr joining us this morning.
Good to be with you.
We will